worry a great deal that we have gone backwards on female labor participation. We've gone backwards on poverty reduction. We've gone backwards on a number of very important objectives for everybody. I hope that if the governments and companies support society on childcare, that this is temporary and reversible. It should be. This is not hard to solve. This is not an engineering problem. This is a resource problem. And it's a perfect place for private-public partnerships.
Women rushed into the labor force starting back in the 60s and 70s, but actually starting about 10 years ago, their participation rates peaked and they started down. And as I say, I think right now they have gotten a further push down with a pandemic and the necessity of staying home to take care of children and so on and so forth. So we probably are going to see a continuation of these trends.
Women are the ones who tended to go outside of their and leave the labor force. I do think it's going to take a long time to go back to normal. Why do I know that? Well, we have an experience of rosy derivatives during the war. Many men were taken out of the workforce and women took their jobs. And in those places which had a lot of employment for women as a result of the war, women labor participation remained higher for years to come.
I think a lot of the progress we've made in all kinds of ways as a society have gone back during COVID. And of course, it hit women and minorities very badly. But I don't think it's because of the differential learning process. I just think that, families that were remote, when they had to make a choice, lots of them chose for the woman not to work. Businesses often fired or furloughed more women. So lots of things like that happened. It was something that we knew. So we knew it was going to happen. It was not a surprise. It happens. The intensity surprised even me. Like if you look at the actual numbers, there are very dramatic differences. And I think that companies need to figure out a strategy about that. It's I don't know how many years of progress we've erased, but it's a substantial amount.
There will be, I think, a wider conversation about what it is to have children, who is responsible for taking care of these children, and whether it's the family alone or whether it's society as a whole. And there the US is a little bit behind in comparison, for example, to continental Europe, where it is understood that children are taken care of by society, not just by the family and in particular by the woman. So I think we are moving in this direction. The childcare discussion is moving in this direction.
Childcare, we've identified major gaps in our childcare provision system. And we've seen how that impacts the labor force, how that impacts women, how this is disastrous. It's a calamity for single parents. And I think that we have to pay a lot more attention. I call it part of infrastructure. And I know that people disagree with me, but I think of infrastructure as enabling physical activity, human activity, and technological activity. And if you want to enable more people to work and work well, you've got to provide support on childcare.
Once schools open, and it feels like that's starting to happen in many parts of the country, we will see many women come back into the workforce. I mean, a lot of the exit of women out of the workforce during the pandemic was to take care of kids because kids couldn't go to school, couldn't go in person. Well, now that they can go back, I think we're going to see those moms go back to work. And actually, it's a lot of dads too. If you look at the data, male participation in kind of that age group in their 30s and 40s also declined because they stayed home and took care of kids. So they'll all go back into the workforce.
We might worry that there are, sticky effect of having taken the woman of the labor force is going to take some time for them to come back because they have made different arrangements with childcare and so on and so forth. And we are seeing, for example, that a lot of Black and brown communities are very concerned about sending the kids back to school and think that they should continue with the remote schooling, and that of course is going to have huge implication for women labor force participation. We might also see something like that at the other end among the ultra-rich, that where women have, gone home and started to take care of their children, and then you lose the flow, you lose your job, you lose your friends, you lose your colleagues, and it could be difficult to go back.
It's going to be really important for the government to think very clearly about things like childcare, like other things, to make sure that the labor force doesn't segment. Because one of the dangers for society of the new workplace is a further segmentation of the labor force between the haves and the have-nots. And that is a real risk. And it's a risk for all of us, not just for those that are less fortunate.
I think we realized that in the current system is just not very workable. It works just badly. The women sustain themselves by pulling on their own bootstrap in the best of time, and then we were not in the best of time, and that the bootstrap just crashed.
If you think about all the policies that are being implemented, a lot of it is centered around trying to make it easier for women to go to work. All the childcare benefits. So I think there's a very strong effort by the administration and this Congress to provide the kind of support, financial support, that's necessary to allow women to go back into the workforce and stay in the workforce for longer. I expect that those policy changes to make a big difference.
There is certainly a tendency in the United States for putting a lot of weight on extremely long hours for no particular reason. And as Claudia Goldin has shown, this has been one of the major hindrance standing in the way of women succeeding in careers. So women are less likely to succeed and even start career that demand a very large number of hours, like being a surgeon or a lawyer. And one thing, the next revolution in women's participation in the labor market, as Claudia Goldin argues, is getting rid of this idea that a good worker is a worker that puts 90 hours a week. Maybe it is just not needed, neither for men nor for women. Maybe we can all work a little bit more reasonable and more flexible hours. And I think the pandemic might have helped with that, because people had to adjust necessarily. I'm curious to see whether it's going to stick or not. I think, I hope that the conversation in the media will help it stick, because I think it will make everyone happier.